Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hello and welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Aaron Halevi. According to the laws of the Torah, animals that have cloven hooves and chew the cud are deemed as being kosher. In order for the meat to be considered kosher, it has to be slaughtered by a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, forbidden fats and veins removed, and the meat soaked in coarse salt to remove all the blood. Then the meat is ready for processing. Today, Sharon and Lurie continue our series on different cuts of kosher meat.
Meat is graded in A, B, and C, and you have an A3, an A2, A1, B1, B2, B3, and basically it is according to the fat content and the age of the animal. A's being the superior, and C's being the older meat, which is likely to be a lot tougher. In Kosher in Johannesburg, we order only A2s and A3s, which is the most expensive and superior cuts. In the olden days, they used to give us the C grades, the B grades, which were a lot tougher, and maybe that's where a lot of the bad publicity with regard to kosher comes from. The old days when we used to get inferior cuts. Today, we get only the best on the market. The next cut is the shoulder. The shoulder is literally the shoulder piece on the cow, and the shoulder piece comes in three sections. The first section is the shoulder bolo. The shoulder bolo is a beautiful, beautiful piece of meat, which we use generally for smoked steaks, for rare roast beefs, for pickling, for cooking, as well as a roast for the pan for Friday night. It makes a beautiful roast and slices exceptionally well. What's nice about this cut is there actually is no fat on it. This is a particularly lean cut, not always the most tender. It could be vacuum packed, left in a fridge for a week or two to become more tender. This is also a cut that we cut for biltong. And biltong, being cut with a grain, we cut it in this direction, whereas when we cut our roasts, we slice it in this direction. All meat is tender when cut against the grain. When it's with the grain, you have long strands and it's very, very tough. So meat is always cut and sliced against the grain.
This is the shoulder bolo, which is a very, very lean cut. It's not as tender as the raisin rib or chuck roast, but it's a very lean cut. And what they like to do with this is use it in delis as rare roast. This is also a delicious cut. Just oil it a little and you put a dry rub on it. I like to cook it quite high, on high heat, and then I slice it very, very thin, paper thin. And this, in my book, is the roast that I would serve with Yorkshire pudding or something like that. And then what I do is, once I've cooked it in the oven on a high heat, I slice it while it's hot, very, very thin. And it makes a lovely rare roast. The round bolo is a smaller sort of roast. It probably feed about 3 or 4 people. It can be cut off here. As you see, we've cut a piece off here, and they can tenderize it, and you can get lovely tenderized steaks. They put it through the tenderizing machine, which pokes it with holes and tenderizes and sort of flattens it up. What I like to do with it is, you can make stroganoff with this, you can make steak pie, you can just cut it up. It's just a nice lean cut, and you just sort of cut around that piece of grizzle, which you just throw away. Okay, and there you have some nice cubed beef with this. Very, very lean. You can also you know, just have it as a whole roast. And what I like to do sometimes is I make Hasselback beef with this. So I cut it like that into pieces, not all the way through, you know, like garlic bread, I would suppose. And then I pack it with garlic and parsley and all that kind of thing, and stick it on the braai, and just braai it, you know, until it's nice and brown, wrap it up in tin foil, stick it in the oven. And it's a lovely roast to have if there's just, you know, 3 or 4 of you. And it's a great cut. Not as tender, as I say, as your raisin rib or your Scotch fillet. It's a different kind of texture. But as I say, every cut on the forequarter has its own special and unique flavors and tastes and textures.
In our next episode of Heritage Travels with Hugh Raichlin, Hugh travels to China, where Jews and Judaism have had a long history. Jewish settlers have been documented in China as early as the 7th or 8th century CE. Relatively isolated Jewish communities developed through the Tang and Song dynasties between the 7th to 12th century CE, all the way through to the Qing dynasty in the 19th century.
There were 3 migrations of the Jews to China. The first migration of the Jews to China was in the 8th century. That was during the Tang dynasty, where many Jews came along the famous Silk Route, which joined Europe to China, where there was trade, where the Westerners from Europe were coming across to China to sell their wares to the Chinese, and the Chinese in turn were providing the European merchants with silk. Many Jews settled at that time in a certain part of China called Kaifeng, which was known in those days as Dongjing. And they were really welcomed by the people of Kaifeng because these were merchants and these were people that would be able to trade and would add to the economy of Kaifeng, which was a hub of industry and of commerce in the 8th century. The Jews lived in Kaifeng for several centuries. In fact, the last rabbi that was in Kaifeng died in the year 1800. After that, unfortunately, no other rabbis were able to come to the community and they have assimilated. When we went to Kaifeng, I met a lady by the name of Esther Gua, G-U-A. And she said that that was a name that one of the emperors had given her family some centuries before, out of honor and respect for what their family had done for the whole city of Kaifeng. Today, she has a Jewish museum in Kaifeng, and she put on a beautiful blue robe with Magen Davids, and even her earrings she wore had the classical Star of David on each side. And she's a very passionate person. She wouldn't go so far as to say that she's a Jewess herself, but she certainly recognizes that her ancestry are Jews, and she showed us photographs of her grandparents who you can see have clearly assimilated with the local population. She's working virtually single-handedly with the government in order to try and win back the ground that was previously occupied by the Jewish community, and in particular where the synagogue stood. And she sells pictures, hand-drawn pictures of what the ancient synagogue in Kaifeng used to look like. We also went to Beijing and to Shanghai. The second migration of the Jews to China was during the mid-1800s, around 1835 to 1850, when the Sassoon family came from Baghdad in today's Iraq, came through India, where they had made a huge contribution in India to the Jews of Mumbai and Calcutta and other places. There were also the Hardoons, the Kaduris, and several other families, and these wealthy Middle Eastern Jews came into China and also added considerably to the economy of Shanghai. In fact, there was a section of the city in which many of the Jews lived. Many of them were very affluent and lived in beautiful homes and contributed greatly. They were bankers, They were merchants of note, and even today the museum in Shanghai has been partially sponsored by the Kaduri family. There was a third migration in the early 1940s, and that was as a result of the intervention of the famous ambassador from Japan, who was the consul in Kovna, in Kaunas in Lithuania, Chuene and his wife Yukiko Sugihara. They came to Kovna and they faced a large crowd of Jewish refugees that had assembled outside the consulate, and there were representatives of the famous Mir Yeshiva that negotiated with the Sugiharas and asked them if it would be possible for them to get an exit visa to leave Lithuania. As a result of a brilliant scheme that was put together by these young men, they said to Sugihara that it would be possible for them to get visas. If they could get an exit visa from the Japanese, they would be able to go to the island of Curacao in the Americas. It was somewhat doubtful that the last part of that plan would be met, but Sugihara saw that these were desperate people, and he agreed, despite the refusal by the Japanese government for him to give them the visas. He in fact asked 3 times for permission, and the Japanese government turned him down. He wrote out by hand, day and night, over a few weeks, approximately 6,000 visas. It was him and his wife Yukiko and a young German man that was working in the embassy, ironically. Each one of those visas entitled either an individual or sometimes several people, like a family, to actually leave the country. They traveled across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway line to Kobe in Japan, and then from Kobe in Japan they had to go to Shanghai. The reason was that the Japanese were the allies of the Nazis, and it was not politically correct that Jews should be allowed onto the Japanese mainland, as a result of which these Jews went off to Shanghai. So this was now the third migration of Jews into Shanghai. Remarkably, there was a Sephardi man that had built a synagogue in Shanghai in the early 20s or 30s of the 20th century, years before the Shanghai became the place of refuge of the Mir Yeshiva. And remarkably, every one of the boys from the yeshiva, from the Mir Yeshiva, were able to be accommodated in this synagogue in Shanghai. Times were very difficult for the Jewish refugees from Russia and now from Poland and Lithuania in Shanghai. They were impoverished, but at least there was no prejudice. And they survived the war, and after the war they left Shanghai for various parts of the world, for Israel and America. And as a result of the intervention of Chuene Sugihara, from those 6,000 Jews that were saved from the Holocaust, there are now 40,000 Jewish descendants in the world today. We also went to Beijing, which was the famous site of the Olympic Games, and there as well there is a Jewish community. It's mainly a transient Jewish community of business people. Chabad, that's the Lubavitch organization, has both communities in Shanghai and in Beijing, which are mainly for Jewish businessmen coming from all over the world to trade in China. There is a very small Jewish population. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 Jews in the whole of China, which has a population of approximately 1.34 billion people. So they're a tiny population, but where they are, there is certainly activity. As a result of the synagogues that have been built by Chabad, as a result of a Sephardi community that has opened up in Shanghai, there are thriving Jewish communities and even day schools and nursery schools for the young Jewish children that are there today. The only and the oldest synagogue that we saw in China was in Shanghai, and that was the Ohel Rachel synagogue, which was on Seymour Road, but Seymour Road today is Shaanxi Road. And we were very privileged to have amongst our group a lady by the name of Moselle Kanner that came with a number of her family members to Shanghai. She was of Sephardi origin, her family having come from Iraq originally, and then came across to China in the second migration. And she remembers that synagogue when it operated when she was there as a small girl in the 1930s. And she also showed us the school next door that she attended. She also walked the roads with us. We saw the home that her family occupied in Shanghai. And she too felt a great sense of gratitude to the Chinese people that had given them shelter during the war years. She then immigrated together with her husband to Canada, and that is where she has raised her family today. The only other synagogue that we saw in Shanghai was the Ohel Moshe Synagogue, which is in the district of Hongqiu, which was in the area that was occupied by the Jews that were there during the Second World War. And that today has become a Jewish museum. The shul has been very well preserved, and the Jewish community has restored it to its former grandeur, but it's not an operational synagogue today. Next to the Ohel Moshe Synagogue is a museum, and in the museum they have photographs and other relics from the time that the Jews occupied Shanghai during the time of the Second World War. And remarkably, between 1937 and 1941, 25,000 Jews were absorbed by the city of Shanghai. And for that we will always be grateful to the Chinese that kept us in their midst. In addition to the hero Chuane Sugihara, there was also Dr. Ho Feng Shan, who was the Consul General in Vienna between 1938 and 1940. And he was also responsible for giving visas to many Jewish people that escaped and managed to get to China. Most of the Jews left China from all three migrations into China during the time of Mao Zedong after the Second World War. And that was when socialism enveloped the country. There was no place for the Jews, and they emigrated, and today leave behind just a small group of people that are there mainly for business.
Welcome back. Recently, our global Jewish community celebrated the third annual Shabbos Project. On a recent trip to Israel, Simcha paid a visit to the Tel Aviv office of the Shabbos Project to find out just how much the project has grown.
The Shabbos Project in Israel has been an amazing adventure for all of us. And the Chief Rabbi came through. We went on a journey around Israel, meeting with mayors and a whole lot of different organizations to get the project going in Israel. It did happen last year, but not on as great a scale as we wanted to. And our aim in Israel this year was to really bring it to the ground, to make as many ground activities happening as possible, and to really bring it to the Israeli people, get them to come together, bring neighbors out, families, friends out to sharing meals together. We met with numerous partners. We worked with many municipalities who really opened up their offices to us, their municipalities to us in such a warm way. They were very happy to give us their support, their endorsement, billboards, any advertising space for free, and many other organizations.
אני התבקשתי על ידי עמותת איילת השחר בראשות הרב שלמה רענן להכיר את הרב וורן גולדשטיין שסיפר לי על פרויקט השבת, ולאחר ששמעתי על הפרויקט המעניין הזה החלטתי לפעול באזור שלי שהוא עמק יזרעאל. עמק יזרעאל הוא ראשית ההתיישבות החקלאית במדינת ישראל, ראשית ההתיישבות הציונית. בעמק יש את המושב הראשון, את הקיבוץ הראשון, את היישוב הקהילתי הראשון, ואנחנו לקחנו 5 יישובים כאלה ובסיס צבאי וצירפנו אותם לפרויקט השבת העולמי.
The events for this year across the country are quite amazing. So usually what happens is people organize a Hafrashat Challah on Thursday evening, then meals on Friday night and on Shabbat day, and then a Havdalah concert as well. There'll be a huge challah bake. Here in Israel we call it a Hafrashat Challah, for 5,000, maybe more women to come and join together. That will be a huge Hafrashat Challah, huge challah bake, probably the biggest in the whole of Israel. In Jerusalem, there'll also be a challah bake, as well as a Havdalah concert, and also a dinner. They're planning everything really around, it's called Hatachana Harishana, which is the first station in Jerusalem. There's a huge array of events happening the whole of Shabbat. It's really becoming a hub for the Shabbos Project on that Shabbat. And there's also different things happening around the city. On Shabbat afternoon, there's a lunch planned in the middle of the shuk, which is something that's very different and very special. This year in Israel, we decided to also open up both an Israel and a global call center in Israel. The reason we decided to do this was because in Israel, you can find an array of amazing, extremely qualified people who speak many, many languages, and we're dealing with the whole of the world here. So we need people who can speak numerous languages and who are also able to adapt quickly, have a community-minded approach, and would be interested in the project. And we set up our office in the center of Tel Aviv, and we've been communicating with the whole world, as well as specifically focusing on Israel to coordinate events happening throughout those areas.
Mi rol en el proyecto, en el Shabbos Project, es comunicarme con la gente de habla hispana, generalmente con gente de Latinoamérica, con gente de España, también hablé con gente de Italia, para comentarles sobre el proyecto y de paso invitarlos a formar parte del proyecto. Les comunico qué es lo que hacemos, dónde estamos, qué material podemos ofrecerles para la realización de este proyecto en sus comunidades.
En France, on travaille particulièrement avec le Rav Moshe Levin, qui lui a ouvert une organisation, une association à but non lucratif afin d'organiser énormément d'événements en France, dans toute la France, soit Strasbourg, Paris, Colmar, Bordeaux, plein de villes, et il y a beaucoup d'événements qui s'organisent en ce moment.
Мы очень рады, что наши русскоговорящие партнеры в России, Украине, Беларуси и Литве снова участвуют в нашем проекте в этом году. Цель проекта «Шаббат» — объединить как можно больше еврейских общин по всему миру, ознакомить их с историей, с религией, с традициями Шаббата.
Mon rôle est aussi d'être en contact avec toutes les communautés francophones dans le monde, que ce soit en Belgique, en France, et de rassembler toutes les informations, ainsi que de les contacter pour voir qu'est-ce qu'ils organisent, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait l'année dernière, qu'est-ce qu'ils font cette année, comment les aider, afin qu'il y ait plusieurs événements dans la communauté francophone dans le monde entier.
Hay más países, hay más ciudades, y de hecho a mí el año pasado me tocó participar en Argentina, en Buenos Aires, de donde soy yo. Y cuando vine acá a Israel este año y me comentó Tania que se hacía este proyecto acá y que necesitaba una persona que hable en español, me pareció fantástica la oportunidad. Y cada vez que conseguimos una ciudad nueva en el equipo que formamos acá, es una felicidad más, ¿no? Porque cada judío nuevo que se integra al proyecto para nosotros es como haber metido un gol en una final del mundo y lo festejamos como tal, con esa felicidad y con esa alegría que se transmite de generación en generación y que no se puede explicar si no estás adentro del proyecto y participando del mismo.
This week's Pirkei Avot comes from chapter 4, verse 18, in which Rabbi Shimon, the son of Elazar, would say, "Do not appease your friend at the height of his anger. Do not comfort him while his dead still lies before him. Do not ask him about his vow the moment he makes it. And do not endeavor to see him at the time of his degradation." Well, that's all we have for this week's episode of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so please send us a message on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Aaron Halevi, and the Simcha team, have an awesome week ahead.